This presentation is about the design of social protection systems in times of COVID-19. To this end, this presentation draws lessons from the Basic Income Grant pilot project in Otjivero, Namibia. The pilot was conducted in 2008 to 2009. A basic income is a universal cash grant paid to everybody and redistributing wealth from the rich to the poor. Already people like Martin Luther King have been advocating for the introduction of a basic income grant, but Otjivero was the first pilot project worldwide where it was implemented. Especially now with COVID-19, the concept is in the discussion around the globe as a tool to support sustainable livelihoods during the pandemic and beyond. This presentation is structured in 5 sections. First, I will discuss why we are looking at a comprehensive social protection system now, especially with COVID-19. Secondly, we will look at a system failure and will draw lessons from the situation in Otjivero before the basic income grant. I will introduce a diagram with practical examples, and this first diagram is called Too Little Too Late. Then a short description of the big pilot. And fourthly, we will look at the results from the basic income grant. This will be explained in a diagram called the big picture, again with concrete examples and 3 case studies. Finally, in the 5th section, I will summarize why COVID-19 poses a decisive moment for social protection and what the chances, but also the challenges ahead might be. Up until the COVID-19 crisis, there have been 2 fundamentally different approaches at the onset of designing social protection. On the one side, social protection to guard against certain vulnerabilities, old age, disability, and to address transient and temporary poverty caused by unforeseen circumstances. The understanding here is that the so-called able-bodied person should find work and provide for themselves and their families. Social protection comes only into play if something is wrong with the people, health-wise, or an inability to socially integrate, and which are then called welfare cases. The so-called welfare ministry was then something nice to have, but really dependent on the welfare of each country. The second approach, competing with this, has been a rights-based approach which argued part of your citizens' rights is not only to have a democratic right to vote, a right to education and to health, but also a basic right to economic resources to afford decent nutrition, shelter, and basic economic participation in society. These different approaches are intrinsically linked to certain questions social protection sought to solve. The first one, the concern was that social protection should be targeted to those who otherwise cannot fend for themselves. The underlying concern was that if you would give too much protection, people would become lazy. They become fat cats, and fat cats don't go out and catch mice. So in order to prevent people to become fat cats, we need to keep them hungry for more. Therefore, you could only spend a certain percentage, maximum 2 to 3% of GDP on social protection to stay within the envelope. The question was therefore, who is the most deserving and whom can the state offer some help to, always staying clear not to do too much so as to keep a role for charity, the goodwill of religious groupings and people as well. Whereby the second approach comes with a completely different question. Yes, financially viability is important, otherwise you ruin the system. But the first question is, whom are we missing? And those who we miss are the people whose rights we infringe on. One approach which builds on the concept of interdependence in social security is the basic income grant. The concern here is that there are certain times during the life cycle, but equally during the employment or unemployment cycle, where everybody is vulnerable. So to set a foundation from where to work, the basic income grant gives to everybody and recuperates the money from those who don't need it. This gives economic meaning to the concept of Ubuntu. We are because we are together. COVID-19 has exposed the social and economic problems associated with selective targeting. The concept of safety and vulnerability needs to be adjusted and rethought, and the notion of fiscal space has been challenged. COVID-19 requires comprehensive coverage, easy administration, a rights-based approach to be crisis-proof. The UN General Secretary Guterres summarized the current three most important challenges as inequality, social protection, and climate change. So a comprehensive social protection system is an integral part of a healthy society and economy. Too little, too late, a scenario which we are all too familiar with. An economy which works like the Wild West. You have some cowboys with herds of cows which overgraze an undernourished soil. With the grass, the people on the bottom suffering. It is a me-first economy. The huge Bazan cows get fed by overeating everything from flowers to grass to its roots, leaving a scorched soil behind. This was the same in Ochivero in 2007, before the basic income grant was introduced. There was a farmer who owned the only store. Here's Hardy Köhler, not necessarily a mighty cowboy, but somebody who, through his monopoly situation, was able to exploit the people of Ochivero village through overpriced goods, excessive debts, and so on. For all the other people, there was too little money left in the community to enter into the market. Let's go back to our diagram. So you have the cows, and then there is the grass. The people, they have too little. There is some trickle-down effect, yes, when one of the cows lets off some dung, but it is hard to live on so little, even for tough grass. More often, mushrooms eat the dung, the shebeens in the community. And what then about social protection? Yes, there was already some in Namibia at the time. Namibia has a universal old age pension more than many other countries. And this is how families barely survived. Let us hear how this life looked like. The situation in Ochivero was dire before the big. And I want to read only one quote which encapsulates the situation. Here's Wilhelmina Gavises, who said at the time, "I and my 3 children depend on my parents for food and accommodation. Sometimes I wish I was dead. Because I cannot stand this type of life anymore, I'm supposed to provide and protect my children and parents, but I'm failing to do that." This is life in too little, too late. As you can hear, this is a system built on fear, complete dependency on the farmer, the cow, on the parents, the old age pension, and one last example on how it looked like in Ochivero before the basic income grant in terms of shelter. Here's Aaron Swartz, also a pensioner, he lived with 18 people in this tent. Too little, too late, not even the basics for most people in Ochivero. This is part of the Me First economy. Let us now look at the Basic Income Grant pilot project in Ochivero 2008 to 2009. Before the pilot, there had been a lot of political debate about a basic income in Southern Africa. In South Africa, for example, COSATU had brought the idea of a basic income grant to the Job Summit in 1998. In Namibia, a basic income grant was initially proposed by a tax commission, which saw redistribution as a prerequisite for growth in Namibia. But the argument was always, it has never been tried and tested in the world. As Nelson Mandela put it, it always seems impossible until it is done. This is why the big coalition decided to pilot a BIG in Ochivero. This meant to pay a basic income grant for 2 years, a basic income grant of 100 Namibian dollar per person per month, universally to everybody from 0 to 59 years, because from there on people were covered with a universal old age pension. No additional interventions in the pilot project, no conditions, no training, etc. We registered the whole village of 1,000 people in one go. There was comprehensive research done with an international reference group of which Ingrid and Mike were also part of. And yet there was a lot of opposition internally and internationally just to the idea of paying 100 Namibian dollar, about 10 US dollar unconditionally. One morning in our home in Windhoek, Claudia got a phone call from Washington. A renowned World Bank researcher called and said and asked, "We in Washington hear so much about Ochivero. Are you seriously giving out money unconditionally to poor people?" The World Bank in Washington was concerned about the small village of 1,000 people in remote Namibia where everybody got 10 US dollar a month for 2 years. At that moment, we felt like being in an Asterix and Obelix cartoon. So let us have a look at what happens when poor people get money unconditionally. The big picture here shows the economy can work differently. The cowboy market system is not a God-given economic system, and in order to achieve this, a basic income grant can play an important role to have a sustainable economic cycle. In this diagram, we again try to illustrate what the basic income grant did by comparing the economy in Ochivero with an ecological cycle. Let me briefly explain. Above the soil, you see on the left the big basic income. The little money is big on the bottom. The big is a lot on the bottom and becomes less the higher we move up. And counterwise, in a national system, the taxes to pay for the big are bigger on the top. You can see on the right-hand side, down from the sun in the diagram. The taxes are higher, bigger on the top, and become lesser towards the bottom. This redistributive system takes money from the rich and gives to the poor, through universal basic income on the one side and taxes on the other. Besides that, no targeting is needed. It works like a natural cycle. What we found is that this little money circulated in the community, and I will come to examples in just a minute, but it changed the life far beyond that. Like little nutrients in the soil, they penetrated deep into the social fabric. First of all, maybe to the more obvious, but still for us dramatic finding in terms of food and the effects on malnutrition. The local government clinic measured all children under 5 years for their weight, and they took their age. What you see in this graph is the green is the WHO normal distribution, the distribution you would expect weight for age for all children under 5 years. The red was the actual distribution in November 2007 before the basic income grant, which meant 42% of all children under 5 years were malnourished. And this picture changed immediately. After 6 months, the clinic again took measurements, and you see the blue curve, and the malnutrition was down to 17% just after 6 months. And after 12 months, you see the gray line, which proves that the basic income grant has reduced malnutrition down to 10% within a year. This in itself would have been enough of a finding. But more happened. So we have the basic income grant, the effects on food. Let's have a look at shelter. Here you see the family of Aaron Swartz with the basic income grant. You see how happy they are, and in the background you see that they bought with the basic income grant money some corrugated iron. This might not seem like a lot, but for them it made a huge difference than sleeping in a tent. Basic income grant, food, shelter. Let's look at their education. Right from the beginning, small crashes, kindergartens were started. You see that here on the right top. And then the school was completely transformed. Right from the beginning, the parents started to pay school fees. They used the basic income grant they got to pay the school fees for their children. For 2 days, people queued at the school to pay. And this transformed the school. The teacher said, for the first time we feel that we are in a school. Children did not only come for the school feeding, but they came, had eaten before, were able to concentrate, and stayed actually up until the end of the day. The school reached 100% pass rate with a basic income grant. Let us look at the health situation. Here you see pictures of Johannes Guagosep. Johannes lived together with his frail parents and his child. His partner had died of HIV, and he himself had developed HIV. But the local nurse had gotten him in a place in the antiretroviral program of the government clinic in Gobabis. However, the clinic in Gobabis is 100 kilometers away from Ochevero. So, in order for Johannes to access the medicine, he trespassed onto an adjacent farm. He hunted a warthog, but unfortunately he was caught by the farmer. The farmer pressed charges, handed him over to the police, and when I saw Johannes for the first time, I visited him in the prison, like you can see him on the top on the right. Johannes' crime was to try to get money to get his life-saving medicine. And if this was not bad enough, in prison he did not receive antiretroviral drugs, so he developed TB and then the basic income grant started. The family put their money of the basic income grant together. They were able to pay the bail and got Johannes out of jail. Then Johannes was able to travel with the money to the clinic and got the antiretroviral drugs. He became healthy again. You see him on the left-hand side. And he started to renovate their place. With the basic income grant, the family had enough food to eat and for the drugs to work. Sadly, when I tried to visit Johannes in 2019, I couldn't find him anymore. He had passed on, and his brother is now taking care of his child. His brother told me how the food became scarce in the household again, and then Johannes started to drink in order also to take the medicine, but with alcohol the medicine didn't work, and he became weaker and weaker, and he passed away. Back to 2008 and 2009, the basic income grant did not only change things on the surface, but really deep down so that even people got a political voice. With the basic income grant, the people themselves decided to speak about their experience, to talk to their political leaders, and they actually did. They went in front of the international and national press and told their stories. Up to today, they say the basic income grant is not something only for Otjivero, but it should change Namibia, it should change the world. So finally, I want to look at 3 people and their case studies. First, let us look at Sella and Alfred Nusep in 2008. They did not become rich with a basic income grant, but they started a small tuck shop. They bought in bulk and sold to other people. Finally, the monopoly of the only shop in Otjivero was broken, and he made bridles for donkey carts. Overall, the adult equivalent income in Otjivero rose from 200 Namibian dollar to 389 Namibian dollars. This shows that people were able to realize an increase in their incomes beyond the value of the basic income grant. The cycle of the economy was working. A considerable amount of the money stayed in the community, boosting local economic activity. And even in 2019, Sella and Alfred still showed what they bought with a basic income grant and what they achieved with their small business. So people started small businesses. And there were also those who started bigger economic ventures. Here is Joseph Ganep. Joseph Ganep used the basic income grant money to buy cement and to produce bricks. His brick business turned out to be so good that the farmers around Otjivero did no longer go to Windhoek to buy the bricks there, but they bought bricks from him since they were cheaper and more solid, as they related. His business went very well. But when I visited him in 2019, so 10 years after the basic income grant, he related that the farmer next to him wanted to buy his business and he had cash problems to buy cement, since often people bought on debt, and with debt you cannot buy cement. And therefore he was now in a catch-22 situation, thinking about selling his business. He would still work there, but as an employee, no longer as an employer. So there were small businesses, others who even employed others, and others again who really made it. Here's Frida Nimbara in 2008. On the right top, you see her in her shack. First, she started with a basic income grant to make some rolls on a fireplace. Then she was able to buy a fridge and a stove and producing rolls, $1 Namibian each, for the community. You can see on her shack in the back, it's written "Good Life After Struggle." And in 2019, Frida has built a stone house, a stone bakery, fully fledged bakery with her own sign, which you can see there on the top, Frida Bakery, and professional equipment. But she still sells her rolls for $1 Namibian each, because she says otherwise the people in Otjivero will not be able to afford her rolls. This is, in brief, a picture of how the economy looks like with a basic income grant. To summarize, COVID-19, let me conclude. COVID-19 has turned the world upside down. The importance of a comprehensive social protection system has acutely become apparent. This is a decisive, if not the decisive, moment. And this implies chances. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we could realize that vulnerability is not only affecting some, but can affect everybody. And out of that, I think a genuine solidarity has grown. The economic system is changing, whether we like it or not, so let us change it into something which is better than before. Economic justice and redistribution, it is clear now, these are debates about, and especially in times of crisis, one can reprioritize. The basic income grant is internationally recognized by now, and big type policies are already implemented in some of the countries. But this decisive moment also has its risks and challenges. Fear is often not a good counselor. Often the economic rescue packages can well be regressive, and one needs to carefully analyze whether they are regressive or progressive. A lot is financed through debt currently, and debt potentially determines the future options or limits the future options. Time is of essence to seize this decisive moment now and to change towards a comprehensive social protection which really covers everybody and transforms the economy into an economic cycle benefiting all people. I thank you.